Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of Cursed Luck, Broderick, Coven, Book 5 by A.J. Renee. Brought to you by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Did luck play a part in falling in love? If so, Edward Broderick was screwed, because the one thing he wasn't was lucky. At least not for himself. Those in his life would argue the opposite, but he knew the truth. Leaning against the kitchen counter, Edward raised his glass of whiskey to his lips and sipped. He scanned the room as the smooth liquid slid down his throat. His brothers, James and Junior, laughed at something one of their wives said in one corner. Farther over, Max and Carter focused on whatever Katya, Max's fiance's daughter, said, and Brandy grinned at Ethan and Serena as her husband, Ryan, rocked a sleeping Gia in his arms. There was no doubt in his heart or mind that he loved his family. Maybe it was proof enough that he was not as unlucky as he believed himself to be. He had a large family, and they had always been close, but he never quite fit in. As one of 7, he always found himself the odd man out, but he did not resent any of them for it. They didn't even realize they did it. But in all truth, Edward was a loner, and liked it better that way. His gaze returned to his baby brother and the man's bride. Everyone was together, celebrating the couple's union at their home. It was another beautiful wedding in one of their yards with their closest family and friends. He had never seen Ethan so happy, and he was thrilled for the newlyweds. Serena was a gorgeous bride, an ethereal beauty floating down the aisle toward Ethan. Their vows were simple and powerful, exactly like the two of them. Edward could not have orchestrated a situation in which his brother would have found a better woman, or, for that matter, any of his siblings. They had been matched well, and in time each pair would make their way down the aisle. Everyone but him. Love was not in his cards. He understood his purpose, and on most days it didn't bother him. He was accustomed to the random hookups or arrangements with women in his life. Seeing his family glow with the sort of love his parents had shared calmed the inner turmoil within him. Since learning the truth behind his mother's death, he'd struggled with attending their weekly family dinners. Some of his excuses were light. His work sent him away often, but not nearly as much as he'd led his family to believe. It was something his older brother, Junior, would have figured out rather quickly if he cared to really check in on him. At the bitter thought, Edward tossed back the last of his whiskey and slipped out into the yard. Most of the guests had left, but the bar he had gifted them for the wedding was stocked and the bartender well tipped. "What can I get you, sir?" the man, dressed in a tux, asked. "Another of the Johnny Walker, please." He muttered politely as he dropped a 20 into the tip jar. "Hey, big spender," a throaty voice sang. He startled and turned to see who'd joined him. "Excuse me?" A gorgeous woman wearing a long, flowy dress with a plunging neckline laughed and waved a hand. "Nothing, I'm just kidding around," she replied, her voice rich and seductive. He narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what was happening. "Kidding about what?" he asked, a warmth spreading through his body. All kidding left her face as she tilted her head to the side. "Me singing Shirley Bassey's Big Spender?" The frown tipping down her lips did nothing to mar her pouty mouth. Edward slipped a finger behind his collar and tugged. Why did he feel suddenly warm? His eyes roamed the large yard and to where a group of Serena's witch friends sat, wondering if someone was behind the abrupt heat. "You know what? Forget I said anything," the woman said with another wave of a hand. "Can I please have a Coke with a lemon in it?" she asked the bartender. Returning his attention to her, Edward found she had moved closer to the bar and dismissed him entirely. Edward had never been so confused in his life. She sighed with displeasure as she fiddled with the napkin the bartender had set down. He admired her sun-kissed skin and wondered if he had ever seen such a pretty skin tone. Before he could take in the dip of her waist, she dropped $1 tip into the glass jar and thanked the bartender. What just happened? He muttered to himself, ignoring the muffled chuckle behind the bar. Turning on his heels, he watched her move toward the group, her hips swaying in a tempting fashion with each step she took away from him. It was seductive, and left him with the need to follow her. His gaze dipped to her feet, and he couldn't stop the surprise from blossoming inside his chest at her barefoot state. Instead of returning to the kitchen, or worse, following her, he moved to the hanging egg chair in the corner of the patio. He loosened the tie around his neck and unfastened the top 3 buttons of his shirt before sipping his drink. Still puzzled by the woman and their interaction, he studied her from his perch. She exuded confidence and held court like a queen with her subjects. Her kind, intelligent eyes took in the others and sparkled with amusement at whatever they were discussing. "Don't you break my chair," Serena teased, drawing his attention away from the group. Flowers dotted her mass of red hair, which was pulled behind her into a loose braid. Her wedding dress flowed around her like a cloud. "Are you calling me fat?" he asked, his brows knitting together. Serena laughed. "Not at all. But whether Ethan hooked it up properly is yet to be seen," she said, with a finger pointing toward the patio's ceiling. He chuckled, imagining his brother screwing the chain into the wrong spot. "I guess I'll have to be extra careful then." Serena pulled a chair to his side. "So why are you out here all alone when everyone else is inside?" His lips twitched. "I'm not all alone," he told her with a nod at the bar and the group in the distance. "Right. You know, I can't blame you for needing some fresh air. Your family is..." She let the sentence trail and raised a brow at her. Serena chuckled and shook her head. "Not going to help a girl out." He grinned. "Nope, I was genuinely curious as to what adjective you'd come up with." "I'm kind of all out." Serena threw her head back and laughed, emitting a loud, boisterous sound that made him join in. He could not remember the last time he laughed so hard. But when they finished, his mouth hurt from smiling. His gaze moved past Serena as the mysterious woman quickly turned away. "I see you've noticed Mia," Serena stated with a smirk. Mia. The name suited the woman well. "We shared a rather strange interaction at the bar. How do you know her?" he asked, and slipped from his whiskey. "Brandy introduced us a little bit ago. She's the one who helped Vanessa out at your cafe." He sifted through his memories and snapped his fingers. "Oh, yes. We replaced a few tables." Serena watched him closely. "Yes, things broke, but more importantly, Vanessa would have died if not for Mia's help." Edward looked inside, but couldn't see his brother and his brother's girlfriend. He hadn't realized how serious the attack had been. "I didn't know." Serena pat his knee, and he met her eyes. "I know I don't know you well, but I can tell they've missed having you around. It may not seem like it, but they do." Dropping his gaze to the amber liquid, he gave it a swirl. "Do you know why I went into business?" "No." "Facts and figures are black and white. They must add up. And when they don't, there's a variable out of place. It's rare you can't fix it and make it work. Here with the family, I'm that variable. And it's never black and white." Before Serena could do more than set sad eyes on him, he kissed her cheek and pushed to his feet to head inside. "You made a lovely bride," he told her with a smile. "Welcome to the family." Chapter 2. The group around her chatted excitedly about the upcoming full moon ritual, but Mia's mind, and body for that matter, were miles away. Or feet away, to be more accurate. Her attention flitted toward the patio where the handsome Broderick sat. They had never been formally introduced, but it was clear he was one of Brandy's many brothers. His dark hair, the shape of his face, and build were similar to the others. The only guests still at the house after the wedding were the immediate family or members of Serena's coven, present company excluded. She was surprised when they invited her to join them later, and even more astounded at how comfortable she felt with the group. Mia Hemlock had known she was a witch since childhood. It had never been a secret, and everything magical flowed through her naturally, but she had never participated in any formal coven, accepting her magic and practicing it in her own way. The beauty of earth magic was it was all around her. With her natural affinity for it, she didn't really need soil or sun rays to work her magic. Spells could assist her with other magic, but the exhilaration of connecting to Mother Earth was incomparable. Perhaps it was why she was eager for the upcoming ritual, coven or not. At least she had been. All she could think of now was the handsome man with hard eyes. She couldn't figure out if he was solely arrogant or awkward as hell. A man that good looking? She chalked it up to arrogance. Mia adjusted the skirt to her dress, wiping away the imaginary lint from it. The green fabric was light and felt amazing against her skin, but for the barest of seconds she questioned her boho style. It was far from conservative. Something she expected was the norm for the woman of the handsome Broderick's life. She never cared for other people's opinions of herself. It never mattered, and it was far from her business what others thought of her. She refused to start caring now. So what if her skin came abuzz at merely the sight of him? Mia had plenty of devilishly good-looking men and women alike. It was never their looks that caused her to accept a date, but rather the inner spark she felt. It didn't matter to her if their reproductive organs matched hers. "Mia?" Hugh called, and from the sound of it, not for the first time. She muttered, as Serena stepped into the patio. "We were wondering what affinity you have, if any," he said, and she noted the other curious eyes studying her. Mia smiled. "Earth," she said, opening her palm so they could watch a rose blossom materialize. "Wow," one of the women said and nodded. Another shifted uncomfortably and peered past Mia. "Before we get carried away, are we sure it's safe to... you know?" Hugh waved a hand away and shook his head. "Nah, we're good. That's Edward, one of the Broderick brothers, although I'm not really sure what he can do." It took everything she possessed not to turn and take in the man occupying her thoughts. She gave Hugh a silent thank you for providing them Edward's name. Edward Broderick. The name was old and stuffy for the man who'd been at the bar. Old he didn't look, but possibly he was the latter? Laughter filled the air, giving her a reason to look over her shoulder. Serena's and Edward's heads were tipped back as the joyous sounds filled the air. She doubted the man could ever be described as stuffy with a laugh like that. She smiled at the sight, wishing she knew what had caused it. When the sound died down, she forced her attention back to the group, but not before remembering the bar. "He may be a Broderick, but the bartender isn't one of us," she whispered before sipping her soda. All eyes looked past her, and a collective sigh could be heard. She chuckled and pushed to her feet. "Let me see if we can do something about that." Pushing her shoulders back, she turned as Edward slipped inside. Serena's expression was worried, the opposite of what it should have been for a bride on her wedding day. "Everything okay?" Mia asked, a few feet away from her. Serena shook her head and offered her a sad smile. "Yeah, just stubborn men." "Ah, are you close with all of your in-laws?" Mia asked before she could think better. Serena may have invited Mia to her home and wedding, but she was still the high priestess of a coven. They weren't known for being open to such discussions. Serena studied her before pointing at the old egg-like chair Edward had vacated. "Join me?" Mia nodded and gathered the material of her dress before climbing in, her legs hanging and plush pillows at her back. Now I get it," she muttered. Serena chuckled. "Yeah, it's one of my favorite chairs. Put your feet up if you like." She made herself comfortable as Serena spoke, deciding to wait to ask her about the bartender. "The Brodericks didn't grow up like most of us, but they're a tight bunch. Ethan aside, I'd say I'm the closest to Brandy, but it took time." Curious as to where the conversation was headed, Mia bit her cheek as to not pry. She didn't have a lot of experience with high priestesses, but she didn't expect them to be forthcoming with personal details. Perhaps Serena needed Mia's help with something. When we met, she chuckled and shook her head as Brandy stepped outside. "Well, let's just say I was not her biggest fan," Serena said as Brandy stopped behind her. "That's the understatement of the year," Brandy said, jokingly. Serena rolled her eyes and made room for Brandy on her chair. "Well, what did you expect?" Brandy laughed and lowered her voice. "My powers kind of trump Serena's," she told Mia with a shrug. Mia stared at them. With eyes wide, she tried to understand what was happening. High priestesses weren't exactly known to accept such a blatant challenge. Serena seemed to take the words in stride, throwing Mia off guard. Fortunately for me, you have no desire of taking my place, Serena stated, neither woman noticing Mia's frozen state. Hell no, all this shit is too crazy, and the last thing I want to do is be responsible for guiding others, Brandy said with a nod toward the group on the lawn. Raising Gia, and whatever siblings we give her, is quite enough. The Brodericks have had quite the go since learning their, you know, Serena said, her gaze moving to the bartender. Oh, that's actually why I came over here, Mia said, dropping her legs over the edge. Is he the only you-know-what? Brandy giggled. You two are starting to sound like the kids from the Wizarding movie series. Serena smiled and shook her head at Brandy. Technically, there are two more inside, but they're family. Why? Mia's brows knit as she thought of who else was inside as Brandy said, Junior's and James's wives. There are so many of you, I'm not sure I'll ever get it straight, Mia shrugged. Then again, I'll probably never see most of them again. Not unless you marry in, Serena said, and waggled her brows. Mia laughed at the incredulous suggestion, even as an image of Edward forced its way into her mind. Her laugh died a moment later, when she noted both women studying her closely. You're kidding, right? Brandy turned toward Serena. I did say she'd fit right in with us. You did, and she did help save Vanessa after all. What are the odds there? Oh, if they are, they don't stand a chance. They would make lovely babies. Mia's eyes bugged. She wasn't sure how they were still attached. What on earth are you two talking about? Edward, they both said. And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading of Cursed Luck, Broderick Coven, Book 5 by A.J. Renee. Have a good night.